Okay, so hi Neil.
How you doing?
It's good to be back.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at Artemis of Ephesus and the Virgin Mary. Mary Magdalene is a little more different because I think that she is more, I don't know if that's the right word, but more human, more like wife material.
Yeah.
And sort of like the what happens after, like the line that happens after Jesus passes away, if such a line exists, which I think it does, but obviously there's other people with their opinions. But the Virgin Mary, because she becomes Theotokos, she becomes the mother of God, she becomes deified, really fits more with the ancient goddesses. So many scholars call the Virgin Mary's birth the last virgin birth, because there had been many virgin births, right? Like there's many in all over the ancient world. But I think the Christians believed or worked at it to create this last virgin birth. So there's no one to have a virgin birth after Mary. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And the reason why I picked Ephesus, and I think a lot of people look at Ephesus, well, there's a couple of reasons. Let's start with the physical ones. The fact that Mary, the mother of Jesus, probably died in Ephesus. There are two locations where Mary, the mother of Jesus, may have died, the Virgin Mary. She either died in Jerusalem after her son was killed or later on, or she went with John to Ephesus. Now, there's a ton of evidence that John went to Ephesus and settled in Ephesus. And John, the brother of Jesus, some Christians think he's just the apostle of Jesus, but whatever. Either way, brother, biological brother, or brother by apostle, same thing. He is the one when Jesus is on the cross and says, take care of your mother, right? And so he is believed to take the Virgin Mary and take her to Ephesus. And there's a house, there's a house to the Virgin Mary near the Artemision, which is the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus. And this is a house where Mary is said to have lived and died. It's a house where miracles are said to have happened. Young children have had visions of Mary talking to them. It took a couple of 100 years for the church to accept that this is the house of Mary. Now, of course, they accept that. And so this is a house of prayer, and it's a sacred site, blah, blah. So that's a physical example.
Yeah.
Right?
Can I ask you before you, just real quick, where does that legend start? Is it early on with that place?
The house of Mary.
Yeah.
I would say that the very first, I'm going to find my notes here.
Sure.
I would say that the very first instance that people refer to is the fact that Jesus looks at John and says, take your mother away, or keep your mother safe, or keep our mother safe, or something like that. So I would say that people begin to follow John. So wherever John ends up.
Okay.
So that would technically be almost right away after the death of Jesus, because John.
So this location is where John is staying. Is that what?
That's right. That's right.
Oh, okay. All right, that makes sense.
That's right.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, that's fun.
So that would be, I don't know. Jesus dies in 33. John, it depends. Some scholars say that John dies by 100. Well, they say that the Gospel of John is written in 100. So it's unclear whether it's this John that wrote it or another John, right?
Put aside the question of did it happen or not. Like,
right.
Let's assume that it did. If it did, John would probably have been a young, maybe a teenager or something, because if you're going to tell somebody, here's your new son, you're not going to tell it to an old man.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to say, if like for example, he's on the cross and he's looking at his mom and he sees one of his disciples he's going to choose the one who's the youngest to be, hey, here's your new son, like, mother, here's your new mother. You're not going to find the 75-year-old man and say, here's your new son. It's going to be the young one. So it would make sense that he was a young boy when Jesus was around, and then sort of like carried on this tradition to a different place. Yeah.
I mean, so academically speaking, Jesus is said to have 3 biological brothers, James, John, Philip, and 2 sisters. It's unclear so James seems to be the older after Jesus, right? So Jesus is first. There are some people that argue that these are Joseph's children. and then Mary comes along and she has Jesus. There's that argument. But most, I don't want to put them all under the same umbrella, but most scholars will say Jesus is first. And then, of course, Mary and Joseph would have had children like everyone else. So John is, I can't tell if he's between James and Philip, or, I mean, there's no real evidence for this. This is more like a guess, an academic guess. So
I've heard people make the case that he was a twin.
That he was a twin.
Which is very odd, because it's like, if he's a twin, then what's up with the other brother? What's going on? Like,
yeah,
he just didn't get any. He just wasn't. I don't know. I've heard that before, though.
I don't know what
that from.
I don't know what the.
I can't remember who said that, but I think it might have been Bart Ehrman, actually.
Oh, I love Bart Ehrman.
Who said something like this is obviously all this stuff that we're saying. None of this is proven.
No.
Like we can't like find like a rock somewhere that says all this stuff. This is all we're all just like reading between the lines and trying to. And some people are not, just don't like that. Some people are just like, I need to see like a videotape of this stuff for it to be real. I'm not one of those people. I like to take things with a grain of salt, but I also like to take things at face value too, because it's fun to deal with it. We're dealing with these texts, and like sometimes I'll just assume as much as possible just to get to a certain place, and then we can discuss those things.
Yes,
that's basically what I'm saying here. But with all that being said, the fact that he would have family. And these are the people who are carrying on traditions makes sense. Who else is going to do it?
Yes.
You know?
Yes. And, if we look at the Virgin Mary as a normal Jewish girl, I mean, before the infancy gospel of James, when she becomes this deified vision in Theotokos, if we just look at her as a historical figure, which she would have been a Jewish girl, 14, 16, however old, and there would be no reason for her not to have other children within the Jewish faith, right? There was nothing that would have said, no, this is the only one. It historically doesn't make sense. So it would have made sense that they would have created a family. And the fact that Joseph is so old is a much later story, right? That's a much later story. And so Joseph.
Yeah, Joseph doesn't show up in the text until the second gospel that's written, and Paul never mentions Joseph.
No, and he never mentioned, what's really fascinating about Paul is he never mentions a virgin birth.
Right.
He would have, had that been the situation.
If that was the big deal, yeah.
Right? Like, Paul would not have let go of that. I don't know if my mentor for my PhD, his name is Barry Wilson. He wrote a book, How Jesus Became Christian, which is a fantastic thing on Paul. He's like an expert on Paul. And one of the things that we always have these discussions about Paul is like, what was Paul's marketing strategy? And had he heard of a virgin birth for Jesus, that would have been a guarantee he would have been talking about it. But I think because Paul was Jewish himself, he understood Jesus as another historical figure and like within his own community, and realized that I don't think he would have thought that, oh my God, we have to add a virgin birth. I think Paul really relied on that vision that he had.
Yeah.
And he didn't say anything about Mary. In fact, he doesn't mention their specialty, like how special she might be, and, her connection to nothing. So that tells us, that's how we read history, right? We got, like you said, we read between the lines because someone like Paul thought that Jesus was coming back immediately.
Right.
So he wasn't even really documenting a history.
Yeah. Now, right. I want to go back to what you were saying about Ephesus and John, because I have a question: is do you think that if, say, John relocates to Ephesus, he goes to this city, and maybe he's Jewish and he doesn't know much about Artemis, he shows up to the city and he sees this is a Temple of Artemis, everyone here worships Artemis, she's the big deal here, and do you think he's contributing to the idea of Mary becoming like Artemis? Because what do you think happens, or does that's just way too speculative?
Okay, and this is just my personal opinion based on some the research. I don't think that John thought of Mary as a divine being of his
right.
So
it's going to be typical for someone who's of Jewish faith. They're not
right.
They're not deifying people. They're
no.
It's very monotheistic. Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that he expected that she would be Theotokos even. I don't think so. That didn't seem to be in the language at all. And if we are looking at the Gospel of John, the Gospel of John barely mentions Jesus at all. There's no, and actually in the Gospel of John, there's no infancy story. So again, another question. If the Gospel of John is written by John the Apostle, maybe John, the brother of Jesus, why is there no mention of a virgin birth?
Right.
Like,
So
so
this is probably a tradition that develops over time.
right. Yes, in the infancy Gospel of James, the proto-evangelium of James, which is way later, like in 175 or 140, that is really where this is the fan fiction that really lays the foundation for the Virgin Mary and her story.